I thought we
all
could
right.
recap where you were coming from, and then go
Okay.
from there.
So, all right. Let me reiterate what I was saying earlier, in that I don't know that science approaches theology.
I'm sorry, you cut out for just a second there. Can you repeat that?
Sure. I don't know that science, as a philosophy, approaches theology as a philosophy.
Oh, I would agree that it doesn't. I'm not even saying that it like science can be applied to philosophy as it's currently understood. All I was saying is that hypothetically, there's nothing stopping us from looking at philosophy through a scientific lens.
Okay, sure. I don't think there's an objection there. My point would still stand, though, in that science as a philosophy cannot approach theology as a philosophy.
Then it's a question of whether science is a philosophy. I don't know that that would be accurate. Do I understand that science is an application of philosophy?
Do you understand that science is an application of philosophy, or at least natural philosophy?
That's what I was just saying, that it's science is not itself a philosophy, it's an application of philosophy, so philosophy would be less rigid. When something is applied, you're sort of saying, well, we're only going to work in this domain and apply it here. And it
So,
becomes science.
sure, and I have no objection to that until you go, or until you approach theology as a philosophy. Is there a connection between science as a philosophy or a natural theology that would approach theology as a let's see, and here's where I find that we've got a problem. I don't know that we can define these terms in a in a natural sense, right?
Well, do you mean that we can't define them in a way that we can actually distinguish them as a result of the definitions?
Absolutely, yeah. Let's go with that. Sure.
Well, yeah, I would agree. That's why I'm sort of in favor of, I guess you could call it, type of metaphysical reductionism, where the purposes of philosophy, there's a tentative agreement to, we have like 5 words that mean the same thing. We sort of just agree to use one of them. That's what I'm eventually hoping to get to. The whole circular definition, which I know I'm getting misunderstood on my intention on that, but it's like when people talk about defining consciousness, it's like, what does that mean? Oh, what's awareness? Okay, well, what's awareness mean? It's like knowing something. What does it mean to know something? Oh, it means you're intelligent. Well, what does it mean to be intelligent? Like, so you see how there's that problem where we're never actually answering the
Do
question. We're sort of appealing to something that seems rational, but it's partially emotional.
Do you think that we can accept rationality as an axiom?
For what?
Well, like we're trying to define rationality, right?
Where I'm stating, we're trying to tell the difference between philosophy, theology, science. Right now, I don't have an actual like.
No, and sure, okay, but in order to do philosophy, we need to have rationality, right?
I wouldn't say so. No, you just need theology, in my view. But I could see how you'd think that, because you'd want to say you had access to the ground of reason, which you could say,
Sure.
reason is logic or something to that effect.
We can assume perhaps that might be a loose definition, but we can assume that when we're talking about logical inferences, we're talking about rationality. Would you accept that we can assume rationality is an axiom?
Axiom for what? Axioms
Do you
are
do you think
rigid and
no
they're
no
applied.
wait. Do you think axioms need to be defined?
I think that the domain to which an axiom applies ought to be defined to clarify it usage. Not sure if that's what you're asking me though.
No, I'm pretty sure the entire question is contained. If we assume something, it doesn't even matter what it is. If we assume something as an axiom, do you think that needs to be defined?
Well, an axiom is almost like a admission that there's limitation to how much you can define it.
No.
When someone says, "Well, I'm going to axiomatize this," it means that you've actually reached the limit of what a purely syntactical definition can do, and you're into a procedural definition at that point. But when I say I'm referring to the axioms of math, not just this dusty thing on a shelf, it's part of the process of solving a problem.
So you assume that axioms are dialectic?
I would say, well, I don't know what that means exactly, to be honest, so I don't want to misconstrue the question. Like an axiom to me is something that it's like an assumption, but it's more formal than an assumption. This is actually where I would kind of like Helmatic to jump in if he's available. I don't know if you're even there because he has a good way of explaining axioms and a background in philosophy, might I add. Background is in physics, math, elastic background. So you have a bit of baggage from how they define axioms, which is applied philosophy, which is like math.
Well, okay. Let me explain my terms. When I say that you're assuming that axioms are dialectic, right? What we're talking about is these are different points of view that we hold to that might define the axiom. Would you accept that?
Well, no, I generally would never accept a definition that was self-referential. So to me, it sounds like you defined axiom using the word axiom. That would never be allowable.
Sure. How would you define an axiom?
That's a problem too, because there's more than one acceptable definition based on domain. So I'm sure you're familiar with like the notion of jargon.
My point still stands, and my question still stands. How are you defining the contradiction or the contradiction of these points?
Well, it seems you're skipping ahead of it now because what does a contradiction have to do with an axiom exactly?
If I accept something as an axiom, there's an end point. Would you agree with that?
Not necessarily, no. I would say that an axiom uh, is the beginning of reasoning in math anyway.
So
We take our list of axioms and we say, well, basically it's like you're in the kitchen with some ingredients. Okay, how can I mix these together to make a soup, something?
So what you're trying to do is if I may, an Hegelian dialectic, right?
We don't really understand things that way because that presupposes that we already know the direction that progress is meant to take place in.
Well, no, that doesn't even.
Practically, yes, but I guess structurally, no. I don't think there's been some misunderstandings that have come about due to this like Hegelian discourse.
So I'm still confused here. Either something is accepted as an axiom or it's not. You seem to think that nothing is accepted as an axiom. I'm curious as to
There may not be
why.
universal axioms. This for the same reason that people speak of, things not having an intrinsic essence or having 100% dependent arising. That means that a universal axiom is like an objective perspective. It just doesn't exist. It doesn't mean that axioms aren't used in every type of analysis style structure.
So just so I'm clear, you're rejecting dialectical logic, right?
I don't know what that is enough to reject it. So, are you familiar with four-valued logic at all? It sort of is a version of what you're describing as a synthesis. You have opposing views, and then you come to a better understanding through the synthesis of the opposing views. Do I
So
take your meaning correctly?
sure. So what you're trying to do is formalize some description of the logic, right?
Not quite, because it's more of a method than logic.
Okay, sure. It's a method. Thereby, it's a process, right?
Then you're at the point of arguing, can all processes be decomposed using logical language or some type of other thing, right? Which is, an argument you're welcome to make.
Do you think
All I'm
that
saying,
wrong?
oh, they're not. All I'm saying is that they're only right if you frame them in the context to which they apply. And that the mistakes happen when we go too far with the Gödel incompleteness theorem. The proof itself, I haven't examined it, but I have no reason to believe it has technical errors. Like, it's valid, quote unquote. Then it gets to be applied to things that it structurally can't be inferred to analogize.
Sure. Okay. So when what we're talking about is, dare I say, classical philosophy, right? Dialectic philosophy. Yes.
To me, it's a very sure. If that's what it seems like we're talking about, sure. To me, it's just like a bare bones, simple bottom up in some ways, top down in other ways, but like a first
Okay.
principles
So
approach to reason.
let me ask you a question then. Do you accept reasonably that the Socratic method of philosophy is true? And when I say true, I don't mean that it's factual. What I'm saying is acceptable. Do you think that the Socratic method is acceptable?
Well, in a way, the answer's already been given, but I'll reiterate it. Yes, to the domain in which it applies. Question is, does it apply to every domain? Answer is clearly not, because it would be giving results that are negative. It worked through where it's being applied.
Right. So there's a provisory answer to every question. Yes.
Really like the way that Darth Arianis put it. There are no unqualified oughts. That's how I would look at it. An axiom is an ought in a very loose way, not in a moral way. If you look at
So,
math,
oh,
it's
well, no,
basically saying you ought to
I
make it.
disagree with that. I can't help but disagree with that. Axioms are not oughts. In fact, I would say that the two are disconnected in such a way that they cannot be remotely logically the same. There's
Math.
nothing about an axiom that is an ought, because what we're saying is an axiom is, right? Is
It
and
ought never be
ought
contradicted.
must no.
It ought
Well,
never be contradicted.
no. Well, they can be, because as Hume so succinctly put it, Ises are not oughts, right?
An axiom ought not be contradicted. That's the ought. It's
But
not, it's
they
not a moral ought.
are.
It's not a moral ought. It's a structural ought. So see the difference there? Or it's not like
Oh, yeah, no,
both.
okay. So I see where you're going. Yeah, absolutely, and I can concur with that. Sure, but the way you put it, you have to understand here. When you're saying an axiom is an ought, you understand there's an error there, right?
Um,
I
perhaps
mean,
there's
okay.
perhaps I'm using the term in an unorthodox way. I'm using like a trickier non-implicit definition of a term. Is that what you're saying, or
Yeah, well,
not sure I
it's the
follow?
negation of a negation, right?
No, I'm not following what you mean by that. There's a
Uh,
double negative.
Well, it is a double negative, and this is why I'm trying to. Uh, if something is what it is, and it ought be what it is, then there's a double negation there, right? I mean,
Oh, that's just a double positive. Something ought to be what it is, then it ought and it is. So that's like a double plus.
right, so it's a negation of a negation.
No, a negation of a negation is only a positive in certain logical doctrines. So to assert that would be to presuppose already a logical doctrine.
Well, see, no, I
The thing is that
disagree.
if you're going to say that a positive and a negative are equivalent and have the exact same valence, you cannot account for things like the Russell's paradox.
I
Why is
also
it
can't
like
account for
why is
Moore's
it that
paradox.
why do definitions fall apart if they're negatively self-referential?
Do you? Oh, whoa, 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 whoa! It seems to me that you're saying that if something is self-referential, it's therefore negated. Is that what
Oh,
you're saying?
no, I didn't. I said, why do negatively self-referential definitions like Russell's paradox texts that aren't members of themselves, why are those self-defeating?
Well, they aren't.
Well, it's a paradox for a reason, and I'm saying the reason it's a paradox is because you got a negation in the definition. Therefore, the valence of a positive and a negative aren't equal because there's more than one way for a thing to not be a thing, i.e., is not A, A. And the answer is it really depends on which logical system you're using. Frankly, I would
But
not use a system that had not A equal to A, because it's extremely restrictive.
but then my answer still remains the same. It's not a self-negation.
Oh yeah, you're right. Well, that's two. Sorry, that's two different subjects. I didn't mean to confuse those two things. I think we got off track here. So you were asking about something being a double negative earlier. Can we just go back to that?
Sure, let's go back to that.
It seemed like you thought that a doubly asserted positive was the same as a double negative somehow.
No, no, oh no.
Oh yeah, I remember
Maybe
now because I said that an axiom ought not be contradicted. That was the point I was trying to get across with how they're used in a manner that maybe, in some sense, crosses that bridge, hopefully, between different uses of the
sure.
term, which I'm acknowledging
Okay,
fully. There are some
so
people out there who will rightly disagree with me on this definition of axiom, and I welcome them to do it, and that's how it should be done.
all right, okay. Let's go back to the very basics, right? How would you define axiom as you understand it?
We'll get to that in just a moment. Let me make a couple notes, but I've got someone in my audience who wants to know, who is this Aussie? So could you please introduce yourself for the channel? Thanks everyone for tuning in. Appreciate it. Mind? Is he giving us a bio? Oh, okay, he suddenly went quiet. I don't know if he's just muted or his computer froze or what, but all right. See what happens here.
So yeah, my question would then be,
Did you
as I
hear
said,
me, Easy? Did you hear
yeah,
me?
no, I heard you absolutely.
Do you mind giving a short bio, a description of yourself? Because my audience is asking.
No, sure.
I'll answer your question. I'm just going to make some notes because you're asking me how I would define axiom, and I do want to give you a good answer, so I will keep it in mind.
Sure. So, just a very short bio of me. I would define myself as an atheist and a theological non-cognitivist. I kind of think of myself as an amateur philosopher. I don't know everything, nor would I claim that I do, but I enjoy these kinds of discussions, I guess. Would that help?
Oh, yeah. I find this stuff is really hard to understand, and if so, like how and why, and because I'm always looking for opportunities to get better at teaching. So you have an answer. If not, I can go ahead with my
No, please
really
go
horrible
ahead.
definition of axioms. Anyway, just keep in mind what's going on. Memes, nice to see you, Mark. Categorical, imperative, Kotov, and MRIC3. I know he asked a question before, but I forgot what it was. Seemed a little off topic now, but yeah, axioms can contradict and be functional like the positive and negative nodes of a battery. Wow, that's really poetic, but thanks for that. Really appreciate it. I'm touched. Well, I don't know if these members will remember that I had my little 0 equals negative 0 joke. That was quite comical. Anyway, what is an axiom? It is a metaphysical primitive. No, just kidding. I take it back. It's probably one of the harder terms to define. I have not thought of it other than as a process relational thing. Do you ever think about how you think?
All the time.
Okay, so do you have an image of the aesthetic of thinking?
Well, I have a model that I use, but I don't know that it's a proposition, as it were.
I didn't mean a proposition, I meant an image. Because to me, when I think of thinking, I'm imagining a line and then a decision, which is a branch point. So maybe the line splits off in 3. Then each of those 3 lines can then theoretically split off into any number of branch points based on a hypothetical future decision tree.
Sure, and just in that you're talking about philosophy because per- perhaps I should be clear. When I'm talking about philosophy, what I'm talking about is in a base form. We're talking about thinking about thinking as a descriptor, right?
That's why I guess that's, why I brought up that example about the aesthetic of thinking, how one understands that process, and I would sort of describe it that way as if I'm going to give a definition of axioms, I will describe the thought process as lines with branch points. An axiom is sort of the first line. It could have any number of branch points. But axioms aren't arbitrary in the sense that they're just interchangeable, because not every axiom leads anywhere.
No, and nothing I've said about what I assume to be an axiom is a starting point. It's literally my personal endpoint. It's literally a statement that I take to be true.
Fine.
It serves as a premise, if you know what I mean.
I mean, to me, that's fine. Some people might have an issue with that from the perspective of defining an axiom as something that doesn't have prior justification, which is a common usage.
Do you
So
think? No, wait. Do you think axioms have a higher premise?
they could. It depends how they're applied. But in math, the definition of axiom is definitely not the same as in philosophy. Could be. I'm just saying right now in the situation currently, presently in modernity, which if we want to be relevant, we have to take that into consideration, even if we disagree. That's how it's understood right now. It's a bit more vague, I think, in philosophy what an axiom is. In math, not really vague, but it's not understood. If I went up to somebody that I went to school with, physics and math, and I asked them to account for the success of the Euclidean axioms, I really don't think too many people could give me a coherent answer to that.
But you understand when I say that I assume something to be an axiom, that's my starting point, end point, my reasoning, my argument. You understand that. When I say that something I presume or presuppose, if you will, as an axiom, you understand what I'm talking about etymologically, right?
There's limits to how much can really be communicated between people just in any conversation. I'm not talking about us in particular. So if you gave me an example, I would be more confident to say I was starting to understand. To say that you're using an axiom for every step, it's the same axiom, doesn't make sense to me because an axiom, as I understand, is only one part of an important part, but it's only one part of the reasoning process.
No, absolutely. It's just one part. But when I start with an axiom and I assume, let's say, x equals y, I assume that to be an axiom, right? X equals y. What you need to do from there is show me that my axiom is wrong or incorrect or
Can't disprove a negative. And if something's wrong, it's negative against what's right, which is natural, which has a force of torsion by existing. So you can't really disprove a negative.
well, I'm
I'm
not
trying to
asking you
say,
to
like,
disprove a
it's a
negative.
wild goose chase to disprove something that isn't correct.
It's a follow-on from premises, right? I reach an axiom, that's my end point. It's my starting point and my end point, right?
I'm not actually sure if that makes sense and would love if somebody who is more of an expert in this particular question would come up to offer some advice because I don't want to, like, I'm not even sure I understand the question. It sounds like it's self-referential. You're saying the axiom is the beginning and the end point of your reasoning, and that
Do
to me is
you
self-referential,
think
but uh,
do you think that self-referential points are wrong?
no, absolutely not. It's poorly understood, and when things are poorly understood, they're non-trivial in their effects. There are negative consequences to that.
So what we're talking about is an abstract, right?
We're talking about an extremely difficult conversation, but it's super important because it's a good starting point because there's a lot of people who are used to thinking axiomatically, even though they don't know that they don't necessarily identify it as such. It's very easy to show them how their reasoning, as it is already axiomatic.
I don't know what that's in reference to. Either I'm accepting an axiom or I'm not. Which is it?
But how about this? You're accepting the notion that you need something that boils down to something structurally equivalent to an axiom in order to judge the difference between true and false assertions.
Okay, so when I let me explain this just a little bit, if I can. When I say that something that I accept as an axiom, when I say that, what I'm saying is it's universally valid. Would you say that I'm wrong in accepting a universally valid point?
Well, it's unfalsifiable.
That doesn't answer my question.
I mean, it's, I guess what I'm trying to say is it depends if you mind believing unfalsifiable things.
Is an axiom falsifiable?
In. Principle, In practice, if I say these are my axioms,
I
coming
mean,
back to what I was mentioning before, they are that which ought not be contradicted within the system in which they're defined.
so they're a tautology, right?
That's correct. I think that may be the same as saying ought not be contradicted. Because tautology means always true. And that's another one that people don't understand very well. They think it's bad. Actually good if something is tautological, maybe. It's kind of like neutral, very slightly positive. Mainly it's neutral.
So my
Tautology.
axioms are neither true nor false, then, are they?
That is excellent sort of, I don't know if it's an observation or what, but excellent point. They are pre-true.
Sure,
Defined.
sure.
The
Let's go
thing
with
that has to
pre-true.
pre-exist, they're the thing that has to be there in order for truth, in order for us to even start thinking about something being true. There's an axiom that has to be defined. And the issue, I think, is that language has what I call tacit axioms. We're using axiomatic thinking, but we're not identifying it as such. So we're not tracing the line from belief thought at all.
Right, so in other words, there are logical axioms and there are non-logical axioms, right?
No. An axiom would give you a logical system.
But there would be logical axioms and non-logical axioms, right?
The axioms allow you to construct a logical system. But what's true is relative to the system, which is itself constructed from axioms, at least in principle, not maybe exhaustively, but that's one way I would describe it.
So theory-specific assumptions would be non-logical, right?
Uh, Wait a minute. That's a good question. Maybe can we call it pre-logical? Because I don't want to give people the impression that we're like logic, because
Oh,
no,
no, no,
it's
no.
about
Well,
being better
my
at
point would
this
be
process.
there are non-logical axioms that we accept. I mean, do you understand what the point I'm trying to make?
Well, the point I'm trying. Do you understand that I'm trying to say that there's no such thing as a logical axiom?
Which would make every axiom non-logical by
Would
that
make every
definition.
axiom pre-logical. Then we would have a question about whether an axiom is reasonable, which is not the same as logical. And it's reasonable if it gives the result that is sought in the domain to which it is well defined, applied,
See, I kind of think we're circling around each other here, just because what we're trying to do is give definitions for a simple word that we all understand mostly, right?
That'll never happen. That's what
What
it
is
seems. Well,
happening?
that's what it seems. Yeah, I agree that that's what it seems like. What we're doing in the beginning, and we are actually realizing why that is impossible. And then once we realize that it's possible, we're just like, I don't even fucking care. The whole point of philosophy is that you accept things, quote, axiomatically, that are true, whether or not there's this biasing effect of, I don't know what you want to call it, like an
So what
illusory nature of phenomenology.
you're adding something that we haven't actually discussed, non-phenomenological, right? Okay, let's go with that. What do you think that means?
Oh, I don't know if I said non-phenomenological. I just said phenomenological.
Well,
Didn't get to non
okay, maybe
yet.
you didn't say that. I'm saying that. What do you think that means?
Very general way of saying that which does not arise in the domain of phenomenology. Maybe nothing.
So it can't be deduced, right?
What is like? What does it mean precisely to
That's
say
what I'm trying to
phenomenology?
ask you. What
That it's
would that mean?
that which happens or that which appears to happen.
So it would be a deductive system, right?
No, it would be. a perception centric epistemology.
But it would still be deductive, right?
Deduction is one way of thinking. It's a very natural way of thinking because it's narrowing. That's what our brain does, narrowing. So it's kind of easy to just double down on what it's already doing.
And it would
And the
still be
destruction is in the chat.
deductive, right?
I'm not sure what I guess I want to say that there's deductive elements to reasoning and most reasoning is deductive, but I feel like there's this other question down the line that may
No,
not agree with.
actually, you raise a good point. There is another question embedded in that. Is something postulated?
You're saying what's the
Like,
difference between a postulate and an axiom type thing?
well, a non-logical axiom would be a postulate, right?
Non-logical axiom. See, I wouldn't define it that way because to me, axioms are part of logic. They're not non-logical, they're integral to the structure of logic. To describe an axiom as logical opens the door to vicious self-referential creation of identities that are absolutely trivial. Basically, well, who made God? That, like, well, that question is not like the point of invoking God is acknowledging that question, saying, well, there's an end to that because there's just nothing past that level of knowing. That limit is God.
Well, see, I absolutely disagree with that because I don't even know what it would mean to say that a God exists. I I identify as a theological non-cognitivist, as I explained before. I don't know what it would mean to say, like, you can put all of these objective operations into what we're talking about, but when you draw down onto the concept of a god, really, what would that mean? Nothing about that makes any sense.
Ever heard of defining things into existence for utilitarian purposes?
No, well, sure. Let's define God into existence. Let's go with that.
Oh, that wasn't the point I was trying to make. I was trying to like say that the reason why God doesn't have a God that made God is because part of the point of having God is to end that infinite regress because it no longer has any valid, useful information to give.
See, I disagree with the well, reasons rather. I disagree with the reasons for why you need to end regressiveness. Why would you? I mean, there's nothing about regressiveness that needs to end. That's why it's regressive, right?
Sorry, what did I say about regressive? I feel like I really didn't say that.
You did. You
Infinite
said
regress. Yeah.
basically that you
Okay.
need
Yeah.
to
Infinite
end
regress.
regressiveness, therefore God. I'm
I
uh,
said
uh,
God is a way to end. I didn't say you need to. Some people say that it's fine to have infinite regress in reasoning. That if you want to end infinite regress, and that's the point of the device, then you don't allow reasoning that enables the infinite regress. You designed the device to stop in the first place. That's all I'm saying. And it was not even a point I wanted to belabor. It was an example of something else, and now I've forgotten what it was. It's like another example of why, yeah, why axioms aren't can't be defined as logical or non-logical. They're pre-logical.
which is why I assume axioms, right?
I would agree and go farther and say we all do, and we're doing it on a level that we're most of us not aware of, and we may be well served to consider bringing those cognitive faculties into our actual awareness.
See, for all of this, I don't see your arguments against my axioms, and I
I don't think
presumed.
we're arguing. Like honestly, I don't really want to
Well, no,
argue
no,
with you. I'd rather just have a
maybe argument's the
conversation.
wrong word. Our discussion started before we started recording uh, about what we assume are axioms. Yes.
Just want to say something that Memes of Destruction said a while ago is that don't worry about it, mate, and does this to everyone, and you're doing a lot better than I did. If you're feeling the heat, which I don't think you are, because the man, I believe, has 2 teenagers at home. Is that correct? Right. He's not answering me right now, but correct me if I'm wrong. So I really got nerves of steel. This guy. I just want to give what he says because he sort of leans towards physics and stuff. But I think his background is actually management. One postulates what is true. Axiom is something that said postulate attaches. I do think this is kind of how at least physics and math understand axioms is that postulate is more general and usually doesn't accept equational decomposition. If it does, it's sort of like almost a meaningless equational decomposition. Something like the parallel lines postulate, it's the starting point. It's like if ever we get parallel lines that are not equidistant, we've fucked up. Again, back to this ought thing with the axiom having sort of this tacit ought not be contradicted. So yeah, the axiom does admit sort of more syntactical decomposition, I think, at least that's how people use it. Now, whether it's actually explicitly defined that way is another thing. You know, these are my opinions. Slash is not the domain in which my primary studies have occurred, and so I request that everybody take what I'm saying with the elastic attitude. I hope I've made clear. All right, so
Well,
Easy Rider, what's up?
yeah, so I don't know that what you've said is actually clear because I think you're
No
defining.
chance. There's no
No,
chance that it was crystal clear, but I kind of don't want to oversimplify it. I want to make it as simple as I can, and but I'm also willing to go into things for as long as necessary until it's totally clear. So
well,
I
okay.
believe in you. That's why that's why I'm presenting it.
Would you agree that axioms are a rule of inference?
Oh God, that's a good question. No, I don't know if
No.
there's an answer to that question actually, because inference may not be defined specifically enough, as induction is not specific enough.
Well, no. Induction or deduction are not specific. I grant you that. But when I say that an axiom is a rule of inference, do you think that to be incorrect?
Frankly, I think it to be. I don't want to say incomprehensible, but this isn't really my area of expertise.
What was the meaning of the question, Easy Rider?
When I say something is an axiom, what do you think that means? That's the
It's a
question.
definition, isn't it? It's a
Yeah,
definition of something.
absolutely.
It's a statement.
Yeah, it definitely is a statement. I'm saying X is Y definitionally, right? It's an axiom. I accept X is Y.
hmm And What is the point of this discussion? I'm not clear where it's going. Is it supposed to go anywhere?
Do you think it important that we define our terms?
Of course.
Then this is where the discussion is going.
So, were you discussing anything in particular?
Do you think we need to have a particular topic in order to define terms?
Well, you need to have. Well, there would be a point to defining terms if you had a topic to discuss.
Jen and I have butted heads many times over the past, and I've absolutely enjoyed every time we have. She and I disagree vehemently at times. She assumes that there is a non-Euclidean definition to reality. I'm saying that she's wrong. This is where
I had no idea that that's what you were saying, by the way, but thank you for letting me know.
I don't know what that means either. This non-Euclidean definition of reality. I don't know what that means.
Then I suggest you talk to Jen and ask
Oh my God,
her.
I'm so sorry. I didn't see like any of these answers in the chat. Questions in the chat.
Oh, it's Jen's idea rather than your idea.
No, I reject her idea, but it's definitely her idea, yes.
Do you know what it is? I mean,
She hasn't explained it. She's never, ever explained that.
Oh, right. I mean, Jen has been known to say our axioms don't agree. Has she ever said that to you?
Not in those words, no. What she said is that axioms are, well, she's actually agreed with me in several points in that I assume an axiom to be the end point, and she does agree with that. What she's arguing for, or against, if you will, is that I don't have that axiom.
Gosh. But is there anything specific you're talking about, or just to make sense of your discussion?
No, there is nothing specific at all. In fact, what we're trying to do is get to an agreement on what we're talking about when we say the word axiom.
Right. I mean, I've thought of a good example, and you're talking about theology, aren't you? Or perhaps you might get that.
No, well, I would rather think of it as philosophy rather than theology. Theology is a branch of philosophy, so I would say that would be our main point, our contention, if you will. We're talking about philosophy in how we define and describe what we're talking about, right?
Yes, I mean, I have been involved in a few theological discussions about the definition of idolatry and blasphemy. And obviously, Christians define it in a different way to Jews and Muslims. I don't know if you're aware of that.
Absolutely, I'm aware of that. I've, as an atheist...
I'm sorry, but this is not a conversation about that. And Claire's banned on this channel permanently. So really that wasn't a step in the right direction of reconciliation, which would have been actually respecting the topic rather than hijacking it to the usual bullshit. So whoever keeps letting her back on stage, please stop. Anyway, sorry about that. Starts to feel like water torture at some point, doesn't it? Okay.
I'd like to answer a question though.
Go ahead.
She brought up a valid point in a roundabout manner. What we're talking about is literally our how do I put this? Our words that we use currently to describe and define philosophy need to be examined. Jen, you and I have butted heads on this many times, right? What we're trying to do is trying to express, I guess, for want of a better word, our ways that we use words to define things. Would that be correct? I mean,
Do you agree that an axiom and a definition that's the same thing?
oh, very good question.
I mean, I
I
would
can.
definitely be fine if someone said that. I'd be like, whatever. If you want to believe that, that's cool. But I would never use that because then it's like, what's the point of using two words?
Well,
The
no,
whole,
we
that's the
can.
whole. The way I see philosophy is you fold it into as few terms as possible. Process
Sure, but
oriented.
we can define words into our philosophy. Yes.
Yes, and the example I gave earlier was God. Didn't go so well. But, that's to be expected. I'm good with that. Nice to see you, Ertica, Ioka. Hopefully, I said that right, and other pals in the chat.
But we can still define words into our philosophy. Like if I use a word and I wish to define it as let's say I use the word glom glom, and I define that word glom glom to mean writing left-handedness. That's a word I've defined, and then we can discuss that, right?
If you want, I mean, language in that sense is unfalsifiable, so it's the teapot thing. You can speculate anything unfalsifiable, and that's the point.
Right, but that's kind of the point of philosophy, though, right?
That's the point of philosophy. It's sort of good question. You're saying earlier it's like thinking about thinking.
Yeah, well, I mean, I understand that that's a very brute explanation of philosophy, but when you break it all down to the most basic facts, philosophy must then be thinking about thinking, right?
I call that psychology, frankly. Again, I'm fine
You
to get
can
into the
call it whatever
definitions
you
and whatnot.
like.
But philosophy to me is first principles analysis. That's the wrong word, but it's a first principles approach to problem solving. It's when, okay, here's an example. Science can't tell us enough about consciousness. So we're sort of like, obviously, there's like a gap of knowledge. The word in French is véhiculer. In English doesn't really have a word. Like
What do you think we should do
move
with gaps in our
into,
knowledge?
we move
What
out of science into philosophy. Figure out what the problem is with science.
But what do you
Then
think
go back to science.
What do you think we ought to do when there are gaps in our knowledge?
Depends on the gap and whether people want to fix it. Like, does a teenager want to know better? Well, they're just not ready. Ought is sort of like, I don't know.
See, I would never use the word ought. I find that has a lot of baggage.
Other people use it.
And I get that.
Based on what feel like imperatives a lot of the time. Would you agree with that?
Sure.
By the way, I'm trying to read the messages in chat and I can't see them because my thing is frozen because my computer sucks.
Can I get you to hold on for 30 seconds? My wife would require my attention just for a very short amount of time. Can I get you to hold on?
Yeah, sure. I'll go through the questions here.
All right, I'll be back.
Switch over here. Ferdinand says that he'd like terms to be well defined. Well, me too. Right now, we're actually in a pre-convo for that, where we're figuring out through direct experience classes of words. Some words admit more specific of a definition than others. Words have meaning. Meaning has a dependence relation with language. So you're kind of into this spiral. Feels a lot like a toilet on some, thing. So This is the stage where everybody explains how they see it. We all think about how everybody else sees it and hopefully have some type of synthesis. Not necessarily presupposing that a synthesis is desirable, because sometimes it's just like, well, no, all these assumptions were wrong. It's not going to be like purely wrong. It's like the parallel lines thing. Just we're just like going into the domain of like, well, can you disprove calculus? Like, what does it even mean if we can do that? That's kind of the point of the um, 0 = -0 joke. It doesn't matter that 0 = -0. Doesn't mean we're going to stop using numbers. I appreciate Nirvana asking about a definition for primitive and such. It's not bad for something to be a primitive. It's something I think a lot of people they'll shy away from talking about because nobody wants to look stupid. And when the discourse is shifted in a particular direction, it's just really easy to shy away from certain ideas. I'm seeing another comment here from quite a while ago. Sorry about this. Ron didn't know that an axiom can be thought of as an endpoint. I wasn't sure what he meant by that either. I kind of want to be like charitable as possible and everything. I guess you could say in the sense of how science sort of supposed to be like abductive or whatever through meta-analysis of inductive hypotheses. You would have then your like meta hypothesis, which was truer because it was like meta true between all your various theoretically differently framed scientific inquiries, which would then become like sort of crystallized out of that domain of knowledge as a new axiom. Was way that seemed that that could make sense, and then you're sort of into questionable, can we just like arbitrarily manufacture axioms? And I think that's a bit of a dangerous way of thinking. We have a level of arbitrary control and definitions that maybe isn't there. Yeah, I think most people who have a background in math and phys are going to think of axioms as starting points, and that's going to be. Nobody can account for synthetic facts. I'm not sure what that means, but interesting.
Okay, sorry, Jen, I'm back now.
No worries. I just was going through some of these audience questions that I'd missed, being so engrossed in our chat. I'm actually really happy with the way it's going. Frankly, a lot of times by now, these combos would have become more contentious due to who knows, probably talking at cross purposes or misunderstanding.
Well, see, I would rather we define our terms clearly in order to have that discussion, right?
So
Right, and
what
the whole
was
point
the
I'm trying to make
point?
here is that that's not possible, that all the best we're going to do is classes of terms of varying degrees of resolvability that are going to be subject to particular dependence relations. And that'll be where we come up with the metaphysical primitives, because when we go through reasoning a meta-analysis, we're going to say primitive is something that no matter how much of the Socratic dissection we apply, we cannot get rid of it. It's a bit like solipsism. It's not exclusively that, but one interpretation of it, I guess maybe it's better to say this is the cogito, but the way I understand that is when you're making a judgment, that the first thing in that string of judgments, if it's could be thought of as a dominoes falling, before the deduction. First thing
Okay.
is your own consciousness.
Do
That makes
you
sense.
think that we can form a valid model for a subsystem without an axiom?
You may not be able to form anything valid in the way that it's currently understood. You're saying valid in the sense that the laws of thought will be never contradicted.
Yeah, well, can we form a model without that subsystem for a specific axiom?
We form models without axioms?
Yeah.
Can.
Can
There's
you...
particular classes of models that you could describe as pre-axiomatic. That doesn't contradict axioms being pre-logical or logic being pre-analytical or anything like that.
All right, let me rephrase the question. Can you show a model with an omitted axiom?
Did you say omitted? Like
Yes, omitted.
as in disincluded?
Not admitted.
You mean an empty axiom?
Correct, yes.
You could argue
Can you
that that's
show
what math
that?
is, you can argue that that's what math is trying to do. And 0 and 1 in a way is a volleyball of empty axioms.
Well, that would be an isomorphic axiom, right?
Isomorphism would be something defined way down the line when you're talking about functions, which are continuous on well-defined intervals.
Well, no,
so we're nowhere near that at this point.
You talked about mathematics. That would be an isomorphic axiom, right?
No, math is predominantly geometrically relative. So the main dependence relation in mathematics.
Well, all right. Let me exchange the word isomorphic with categorical. Would that make more sense?
You can try to argue that, but the best definition is geometric. But I don't even want to take that position. It's too contentious. I don't actually know how we got to this point in the conversation.
Well, see, and this boils back down to what we're talking about when we say axiomatic, right?
Oh, okay. When someone says it's axiomatic, I think colloquially it would be like it's something that isn't questionable.
Then it would therefore be categorical, yes?
Categorical would, I guess you'd say, would be dictatorial over categorical assignment.
Well, you used mathematics as an example, right? That would be categorical, yes?
You could argue that, but then you'd have to say the geometry admitted a composition, a category. Then you'd be into a tautology.
And again, my point would be there's nothing wrong with tautologies.
To just say geometry because nobody knows what that means, the other one.
And again, my point would be there's nothing wrong with the tautology.
Of course not, but we want to reduce the domain of redundant tautologies when we're doing philosophy, right?
Well, we can at least attempt to remove that, sure.
Yeah, we can, and when we do start doing that, we'll find it actually takes quite a while to get a consensus as to what it makes sense to remove. That's where your metaphysical primitives come in again.
And that would also be where I would go back to the axiom, right?
Where does that come in exactly? What's the link?
Okay. Let's use mathematics as you brought up before. We assume as an axiom 2 plus 2 equals 4. Now you can also demonstrate 2 plus 2 equals 4, but you can also accept that as an axiom, like it's a presupposed idea, an end result. Yes? I mean, what we're talking about is an induction axiom. It's an induction.
Not clear what you mean. We're not clear what you mean when you say that an axiom is a conclusion. I'm trying to be difficult. Well, just honestly, nobody has any clue what that means.
All I can do is repeat myself. It's an induction that is formed as an axiom. Do you understand that?
Not really, no. To me, an axiom has to be at the beginning of reasoning, and you're saying that it's an induction.
No, well, an axiom is not only the beginning, it's the end as well.
Well, here's a question. If you're starting with an axiom A and you're ending with an axiom A, what was the point of doing anything in the middle?
That would be my question to you.
Well, I'm not the
You
one positing this self-referential nonsense, so I don't know why you're asking me to defend a position I don't hold. But I do want to go into why you think I hold it.
Sure. Did you not say towards the beginning of our discussion that axioms are not logical?
I said that I didn't want to call them non-logical because that would confuse people, and I thought it would be better to call them pre-logical. And that
So,
you can have logic once you've defined axioms.
so the proof of any proposition should be traceable back to the axiom. Yes?
I wish not everyone agrees, but I wish that were the case because if we could just
No,
make
no,
it
no.
so that
It
all
doesn't. It
proofs
doesn't matter whether
a
it is the
priori
case
get
or not.
derivable from axioms, that'd be amazing.
What I'm
Easy for
asking
me.
you is, do you think that any proposition should be, in principle, traceable back to the axiom?
That's a domain. Well, are you saying that as a domain independent assertion? Because I would say it wouldn't lend itself to universalizability as a principle.
I don't understand why you're rejecting that.
Because I have an incredibly high standard as to what I'd accept. It's nothing personal. There may not even be anything wrong with your reasoning. People, let's go over it again, just in case I haven't misunderstood here.
When I say that something is an axiom that I accept as an axiom, what I'm saying is it is the body of propositions that are traceable back to the axiom itself.
Okay. Are you saying things can be deduced from the axiom?
Sure, let's
And
go
so
with
that
that.
we would deduce things from axioms, and then from the conclusions we should be able to trace back the
Yes,
axiom
absolutely
through some sort of a
self-referential, and
reverse deduction process. Is that?
yeah, it is by definition self-referential. I don't
Oh,
understand why
that's a
you
different
object
that's
to
a different
that.
question. That's a completely different question. Very good question, but there's more than one way that things can be self-referential. So yes, but just because we've acknowledged that doesn't mean we have fully surmounted this issue. We'll just keep coming up. It's the point of philosophy. I've been asked, science can't tell us anything at all about consciousness. That just depends. But we're like right now, we're like in an orthodoxy that says that consciousness is okay. Here's the logic that, as far as I understand it, subjectivity is not the purview of science because science is about materialism. Consciousness is subjective. Consciousness is not the domain of science. Ought that be true? I think it's probably worse to ignore consciousness effects and to attempt to incorporate them, even if the solutions obtained are only partial. Yeah, that's uh that's the end of these questions that I can see here. Oh wait, no, it's not. Awesome. There's still more. Okay, so Florida God says it has to do with your question regarding accounting for the usefulness of Euclidean geometry. By account, I mean a priori. Not sure what that means, but please come up on stage and explain, and we can go into it. 'Cause all about that stuff, and probably Easy Rider's getting tired of my shenanigans by now. But
No, not
actually,
at all.
honestly, you're doing really well. Like the last time we talked was like 23% this good. So I'm honestly pretty impressed. I gotta say, like, do you feel like you've understood
No,
at least just a bit?
I understand your perspective and your philosophy. Yes, I may disagree with it, but I do understand it. Yes.
Oregon, are you able to talk?
Yeah, I just
Did you want to maybe give some
I
opinions since
just
Steve
wrote
said a bunch of
something very
comments in the
important
chat?
in chat.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so a bunch of things. Like maybe the most important thing I wanted to say is that axioms are not the same as rules of inference. Like rules of inference is something that's added top of axioms. So
Very
anyway,
valid point. Yes.
yeah. So about accounting for Euclidean geometry. Well, usually when people in these circles say the term account for, they search for some perfect explanation that can't be questioned. The only thing even close to that is an analytic proposition. Like if you prove something that's an analytic proposition, then yeah, sure, it's true. There is no question. But the applicability of Euclidean geometry in the real world is not something that's true just by definitions, right? So there is no mathematical necessity for Euclidean geometry to be useful or to be accurate in describing the world. So when you go to math departments and you ask them, how do you account for the applicability of Euclidean geometry? They're not going to give you an answer, and you should not expect an answer to exist because there isn't one.
Well, that that would be von Neumann, right?
I don't know. it would be von Vortigern.
Well, von Neumann set theory.
I never heard of that term. Like there is set theory. I didn't know that there is one on Van Neumann's name.
Yeah. It would
He's
take me
referring
far
to
too
the von
long.
Neumann ordinals?
Sorry, what was that, Jen?
I could try to pull it up here. Give you a
I
minute if you guys don't
learned
mind
about
keeping the convo
ordinals.
going. If anyone else wants to come up, you're all more than welcome. And it's great convo, one of my favorite topics. So great time.
I mean,
Basically, the reason I didn't come up until now, even though I wrote so much in chat, is because everything I wrote was questions of the form, define this, explain this, what do you mean by this? And, if that's all I'm going to say here, then, well, why would I come up?
Maybe you could help clarify some of these questions because he was saying that he ends with
Oh,
an
yeah. So
axiom.
what did you mean by pre-logical?
Or you can have logic, you need structure.
What?
You need a structure. Make logic out of.
You said that pre-logical is how you can have a logical structure?
I guess the metaphor I think of is like you don't drive an engine. Engine's sort of part of the car.
And without an analogy, how would you define
Okay,
pre-logical?
you can't prove. Why can't you prove an axiom?
Because an axiom is something that you start with.
Axiom is something that you make proof with. So proof is an abstraction on axioms, and logic is something that you construct with axioms. And things that don't contradict the axioms are the truth statements. They're anywhere from tautologies to assertions of, scientific theses.
Look, Jen, I'll tell you what I know. There are logical systems, and in these logical systems, there are axioms and inference rules. Now, if you look at the axioms of any given logical system, they're all going to be syntactic. They're going to use the connectives and symbols that exist within the syntax of the system. Like any other proposition, you can have the same logical system using different axioms. Usually, when people define axioms, when logicians and mathematicians define axioms to their systems, they're trying to find just a comfortable set of propositions from which they can derive as many propositions as they can. Given a set of true premises, you can have multiple axiomatizations. Now, you talk about axioms as if it's like something very real, but really it's a kind of a made-up concept. Like saying that they're pre-logical also, I don't see how it makes sense. They're literally syntactic. If you have something
No, they are syntactic, and what I would to dumb it down in the most basic form I can, the axiom is there is a set A that is defined by B. I'm using B to define set A, right?
You're say you're using B to define A, sure. So
Right. So, but I'm accepting that B defines A. Yes.
yeah, yeah. So
So I accept B as defining A as an axiom, right?
if you
This is a
define
bit of there's a bit of an issue here because we've got different domains with different understandings, different depths of these concepts. B, different understandings of the terms themselves. They don't even have the same definitions. We're
Well, that
maybe
would be
at
the
cross purposes here.
paradox.
Right. Someone in my chat says, John Edwards, in the Foundations of Mathematics, von Neumann, Bernays, Gödel set theory is an axiomatic set theory. One example. I don't think anyone would disagree that mathematics is itself axiomatic. We are past that point. We are trying to generalize. It's just unclear exactly what we're trying to generalize right now.
what's the difference between von Neumann set theory and ZFC set theory?
Are you asking me?
The what?
Are you asking me, or did you want to tell us about the compatibilities?
No, that's the thing. I'm asking. I don't know.
I haven't studied this topic in depth.
Well,
I'm not sure.
ZFC defines a set theory, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not all up to date with ZFC. I comprehend it vaguely, but I don't get it. If you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I mean, how do I put this? If A and B are sets, right? I'm defining a set. All sets of A are B. Therefore, B equals A, right? I've defined the axiom of B. Yes?
What?
See, this is where I come undone.
Yeah. But
Either all sets of A equal B, therefore all B equals A. That would be a set axiom, right? I
you mean
accept.
that all elements of if all elements of A are elements of B?
Yes, then
elements of B are
the
elements
axiom
of
would
A,
then be all B's are A.
then the set A equals the set B, sure.
So I accept that as an axiom. Then I guess the work would then be how do I define B to equal A?
That's kind of how it's defined. The axiom of extensionality. You say that two sets are equal if and only if they have the same elements. It's kind of an
Yeah.
axiom slash definition.
It would be an axiom of extensionality, right?
Yeah. It's the axiom that tells you when two sets are equal. If you
If you
Yeah.
want
want to
to
prove
have
that,
a process relational definition, you can think of the axiom de facto as the thing that the reasoning is centered upon.
What?
I'm just trying to think of like what distinguishes the axiom. You know? The reasoning is always referring to it as it's building itself up.
Okay.
So
So if two elements, let's just say that A and B, these two elements share equanimity, right? Everything about A is B. Everything about B is A. This is an axiom, right?
Not to be difficult, but it's actually even hard to say that that's an axiom, because then it's like, does it have to be a complete system to be an axiom? Are we gonna have a restricted definition of axiom or not? So, I mean, I take what you're saying, you're pretty much
We're
accurate,
defining
but someone could still
sets.
disagree in theory.
We're defining sets, though, right?
I don't understand it as defining sets per se, but I don't know.
I just wanna say something about axioms. So this is where the word axiom is treated as something that is really more than it actually means. Basically, usually what happens is that take classical logic, right? Classical logic is a very basic example. It has, and I sent a Wikipedia link that describes two different axiomatizations of classical logic. Now, the first has 3 axioms and 1 inference rule, modus ponens, and the second has 0 axioms, and I'm not even sure how many inference rules, but like many. You can count them if you want. It's like natural deduction. So you can be asking yourself, hey, how is it possible to have a system with no axioms? Well, if you have inference rules, which are traditionally classified as a different thing than axioms, then you derive everything from them. So they're kind of axioms, but not formally. So you can have 2 different axiomatizations, 2 different sets of axioms, and 2 different sets of inference rules, both of which give you classical logic, the exact same systems. So axioms are a set of propositions, a set of things that are useful to describe a certain something. Like classical logic is a certain something, and we want to be able to derive everything in classical logic in a simple way from a compact, finite, small set of propositions, and these propositions are axioms. This is an entirely pragmatic thing. And when you say, hey, what's the difference between an axiom and something that's not an axiom? The answer is that some mathematician decided that this is an axiom and this is not. And it's arbitrary. Really, there is no difference.
So, are you saying you can't account for the success of Euclidean geometry, any axiom-based system?
What I said, it doesn't really relate to this at all, but yeah.
I am a bit concerned that nobody wants to try to even bother to account for the success of Euclidean axioms just because straight lines, let alone parallel lines, don't exist.
We've covered this, Jen. We've covered this.
Not sure if we did. Somebody said in the
We
chat the
have.
speed of quantum says the speed of light is a constant as an axiom. Not sure if people would agree with that. You take it in a different direction, or
If anyone decides that the speed of light is not an axiom, then I would ask them to show their working. Either the speed of light is a constant or it's not. We accept that as an axiom.
don't even know if physicists would agree that the speed of light being constant is an axiom per se. I'm not sure if they look at it like that.
I just want to ask you, Jen, what do you mean by accounting for Euclidean geometry? What do you mean by the word account?
I've been using it for 2,500 years. That would imply it has some degree of success. Welcome,
So, so you say, okay, so so are you saying that when you ask us to account for the success of Euclidean geometry, the way I'm interpreting this is, how would you predict the success of Euclidean geometry given nothing about the physical world? Is that a correct interpretation?
Oh, but I like that you interpreted it that way. happy you interpreted it that way. It's better than how I interpreted it. All I was
Because
looking for was to get a conversation started as to this obscure fact about parallel lines thing not being real, but yet still being enormously useful. And if somebody asked me to account for Euclidean axioms, I'd say calculus, bitch. And I'm just wondering why no one has said that to me yet.
anyway, Jen, so like the thing is this. If you're interpreting your question the way I did, then you need to have a priori synthetic knowledge. So, without any knowledge of the world, without any experience of the world, without anything, it's a priori. And because Euclidean geometry it has to do with the success of Euclidean geometry is a synthetic fact, which means that it has more information than just the mere definition of what Euclidean geometry is. So you're basically asking for a priori synthetic knowledge. Nobody can provide you that. Which is why going to a math department and asking them to account for the success of Euclidean geometry is not going to produce anything useful.
Unless they just said calculus. And then I would say, why does calculus work in spite of being wrong?
Vortigern, I have a question real quick.
Yeah.
Okay, so we see some people in the chat, and maybe Easy Rider was saying a second ago that the speed of light could be an axiom, but I guess my question would be to you: Do you know any? I don't know the science behind it, but is the axiom is the speed of light derived in any way, or
No.
is it? Okay, so
No, it's
it
not
is not
derived.
derived through evidence or anything. It is maybe actually an axiom then, right?
Look, when I say that it's not derived, I mean that one of the fundamental assumptions of relativity is that the speed of light in a vacuum is constant. Now,
Okay.
it is not calculated out of anything else. You can measure it empirically. So, what do you mean by deriving something empirically? You can measure it, but there is no more basic assumptions from which you can calculate the speed of light. It's just a brute fact.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So then it may not be out of place for some people in a philosophical sense to call it an axiom then, right?
Well, the word axiom seems to have more than one usage. So
Right. There's a less formal definition of axiom, which is like it can be like just some saying or some deepity, right? But I guess the question would be like if it's a fundamental assumption for what you say relativity, then is it integral to actually performing the processes of relativity, similar to how the axioms of propositional logic are integral to doing natural deduction?
what do you mean by performing the processes of relativity? Like doing calculations? Yeah, sure. It's very important.
Okay, I was just curious about that. Okay. So
Yeah, if you have an assumption in a physical model, you better use that assumption or throw it away.
right. Okay.
Is the-
So then,
So
what is your answer about what is your answer to whether that idea about the speed of light being an axiom?
Look, when you say the speed of light being an axiom, do you mean the fact that it's constant? It's within the model of relativity, it's an axiom. Epistemically speaking, there is the word axiom in an epistemic sense, which is how do you know it's constant? In that sense, no. We haven't just assumed it. We arrived at that conclusion by experiment. In terms of
Okay.
the model of relativity, then yes, it is an axiom. If you want to
Okay.
say that axiom is just a brute fact, yes, the value of the speed of light, the fact that it's constant, is a brute fact. The value of what I said cannot be calculated is the value of the speed of light.
All right.
Yeah, I know.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to get that clarified.
It depends on what you mean by axiom. Different people mean different things, sometimes even in the same sentence.
He's absolutely
Right.
right. You're posing such a good but such a difficult question, right? I put a post in the main stage chat, hopefully clear it up a little bit. I think this is why C is not generally understood, though it may be, the de facto an axiom of special relativity. C is not generally understood as axiomatic.
All right. And yeah, obviously, Vorgan, it makes sense that when talking about things that are fundamental starting points, we can't expect to have a rigorous criteria for determining what the starting points are. So yeah, there will be variation in views of what an axiom is, but uh, uh, I guess well, I guess you clarified everything that I wanted.
Wait 1 minute. There is something very important that I completely forgot. So Jen sent a picture in chat about. Yeah. Okay. So Jen, you're right. She has a very good point here. The speed of
Don't think
light
you're wrong either. Like,
calculated.
honestly, you gave a really good attempt to answer pretty much what I would say almost an unanswerable question. It's like de facto, that is sort of an
Okay,
axiom of
so
special
there is
relativity.
something Jen posted here about the permeativity of free space. The speed of light can be calculated, using if you have knowledge of how electric and magnetic fields permeate through a vacuum, then you can calculate the speed of light. The way it was done historically, I think, I'm not entirely sure. I think Maxwell tried to calculate the speed of an electromagnetic wave, and he got to a certain result, and then he noticed that that result is approximately equal to the speed of light, because I think that they had some measurements at the time. So he conjectured that light is an electromagnetic wave, and it turned out to be correct. Now, the speed of light can be calculated as the speed of an electromagnetic wave going through a vacuum. But then you would have to ask, well, why do electromagnetic waves have the properties that they do? And it really depends, it kind of relates to what I said before. You can accept the properties of electromagnetic waves as axiomatic, and then the speed of light, you can derive it. You can derive its value, which is contrary to what I said before. But you can also accept the speed of light as just what it is, and then electromagnetic waves. Like an axiom is really arbitrary. If you say that one thing is an axiom, then the other thing is derivable. If the other thing is an axiom, the one thing is derivable. It's really
Yes. Yeah, so that makes sense. So what you're saying is based on the system. It could be, it is a fundamental in at least one system where it is not derived, but in other systems you could derive it, and it would be hard to make the case in those systems that it's an axiom. Is this what you're saying?
Yeah, so like when I told you that you can't derive it, I was thinking of like a relativity book. But if you read an electromagnetism book, then they will derive it in an electromagnetism.
Okay. Yeah, and to me this isn't a problem. Yeah, to me this isn't a problem because we could the starting points we have in other systems, it's like you said, I'm sure we could come up with some other system that maybe derives what are starting points of other systems, but that doesn't matter that doesn't matter outside the system. So let's see, one system's derivation could be another system's axiom, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah, and this isn't a problem because this isn't a problem outside of the scope of the individual systems themselves. So yeah, okay, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, Jen, it's very good that you posted that thing on electromagnetism. I would not have remembered it. Completely forgot.
You're most welcome. I'm just happy to be able to have the conversation. I think the people who could follow it to this point would be vanishingly small.
Well, I guess I exhausted everything I wanted to say.
What's hilarious is that Easy just left and he was waiting for an answer to this question. Remember about the axiom being a
Um,
conclusion, and now we finally got to realizing how axioms can be conclusions. Anyway, welcome memes. Thanks for joining.
Hey guys, what's going on? But here's my thing. Here's my thing. I apologize because I was incorrect earlier. I said that the speed of light was calculated by the Planck time divided by the Planck length. I get the numerator and denominator confused. It's the Planck length divided by Planck time, because otherwise we were at like 3.336, negative 10 to the 9 meters per second. It's actually Planck length divided by Planck time is 2.998 times 10 to the 8th meters per second.
Usually, when you make an algebraic mistake like that, most people would understand that it's a brain fart and that you meant the opposite. So yeah.
Right, but well, you should clarify if you make mistakes, because it's only, I don't know, 16 orders of magnitude difference. Because
Kinda.
I'm just saying we should admit when we make mistakes. That's all.
Yeah.
But no, this is fascinating, and I should totally be recording some anime spoof workout video right now. But this is just too fascinating of a conversation, because it's highlighting what I'm believing more and more is true. Is just that so much of the confuzzlement that we have between different human beings is just a matter of like semantics and scalability. Because what you may say semantically in one localization may make sense to many of the folks there, but when you factor in there's like, I don't know, 8 billion or so people in the world now, you got the internet, you got folks from all over the world with all different backgrounds, it's like, well, nobody would ever misunderstand each other on the internet.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here. Memes is one of the people who's taking the time to go through the hyperbolic figure eight stuff. Thad Roberts, is that correct? That's his name, eh?
Yep.
Yep,
It's
set to
well,
release a new book coming out or tomorrow.
yeah,
I
yeah,
believe,
it should be.
for him.
It should be coming out later this month, hopefully. But the big thing is, what also gives me hope is I see a lot of stuff coming out from the IHS, and I'm like, all right, I think a lot of these things are just kind of converging here. All I know is when it gets to a point where somebody's presenting their work on a paper, and Ed Witten, where it goes to the point where it's, well, if you take this to the limit, you enter the realm of quantum gravity. And eventually the response ends up being, indeed. It totally reminded me some things with Dr. Stephen Wolfram and Jonathan, where he would say, but this is almost a crazy idea. It's like, well, yes, take a look at the equations and the data and all it is just this like one or two just other perspectives of looking at things and being like, well, what if we utilized a particular object like an asymmetric Clifford torus? So it's like, all right, it's an object that
I think maybe you
I
could
mean,
talk about what we've been talking about so far on this show, because right now I don't think
okay, I
anyone's
apologize.
following. But did you
Okay.
have any thoughts about axioms or logic or inference models or anything like that we were kind of on that subject before, with regards to your experience? Because your background is management, right? But you sort of trend towards physics, especially with the Thad stuff. Like you're inspired by his. I call it discovery of the God mind via a computer, but I'm sure other people call it other stuff.
We use many words to describe many things. Ultimately, the thing that I notice more or less is no matter what you want to consider the universe, whether you're viewing it as quote unquote the mind of God, a grand architect, it's what we're all part of. We're all part of the one. And that's why I think as we continue to hash these things out, because people have all different perspectives and will understand all different things. But when you actually see what's going on, or you can try to infer what's going on as far as axioms go, this is one of the reasons why when you first started beating me over the head with, it's all about the axioms, it's all about the axioms, I'm like, I don't even know what she means. I think I'm giving an answer to something, but I'm actually proposing something else. So I'm like, okay, words matter. So let's kind of redefine this a bit. And that's why I'm saying a postulate is what ends up sticking upon an axiom. So what happens if one postulates an axiom? Well, at that point, the axiom needs to stick upon itself, so it kind of comes full circle. So whether you want to express that in an algebraic or a geometric form, I mean, these are different modes of communication we're just all utilizing. And that's why very often getting terms down, it may kind of seem like, we're kind of being sticks in the mud and everything. And does it bother me sometimes? Yes, it aggravates me. But at the same time, I'm like, as we continue to clarify what we are attempting to communicate to one another, because let's say we know what's going on, we have the solution. Now, if the solution exists in one's mind, that's wonderful. Now, can one communicate that potential solution to what's actually going on to other minds as well? Do we have ways to communicate that, whether that being in the written word form, whether it happens to be in a pictorial form, whether it happens to be in a method we can actually, I don't know, do via an experiment, actually have a prediction and be like, okay, now does our experiment agree with what we've postulated? Does it abide by the axioms we have laid out? Because at that point, it's like, all right, we probably got a pretty good picture of what's going on.
Did you see what I put in the chat?
Which chat? There are many chats here. We're talking Discord? Are we talking your YouTube chat?
I'll take that as a no.
No.
It's a solid no. See how we're on main stage? It's just the one above that, main stage chat.
Yes. All right. I've entered this dimension.
I was like, nobody can tell
how dare
what
you?
the F my effing hyperbolic words and apples and mushrooms are.
Well, this is the thing, Jen. I happen to have been here for probably tens, if not potentially 100+ hours or more of having these discussions with you and other folks operating within these valences. I tend to think, and again, this is just a guess, but the average listener at this current moment probably hasn't been here for all these different discussions, whether they've been broadcast, whether they've been behind the scenes or whatnot. So they have limited dimensionality versus what we've discussed and we've experienced, because we also have these hundreds. It's kind of like you've been studying a field for 10 years and you have this much knowledge, and all of a sudden, well, now you're a graduate student, you just got into this field. So yeah, you have some educational background, but now you only have a year's experience in this field. It's relatively different in the amount. We've been through many of these discussions on a number of different levels. So if all of a sudden you say, hey, look at this cool looking clementine metal thing with a little twist in the middle, and being like, yes, this explains most everything, people are like, what the heck is she talking about? I can understand that
now I
perspective.
try to do the topological formation.
No, but you all were getting there. You all were getting there. It's just, I think, who is that person, Claire or something, saying it's like what you are actually talking about earlier. It's like, I just noticed your YouTube channel and it just happened to say, what does it say? Hold on, another window, dimension, discussion about theology, philosophy, and science. Now, one of the things I've noticed, at least when I came from the quote unquote skeptic community, okay, yes, slight tangent, but I will relate this. All I'm saying is one of the things that I noticed is I would see two people literally put up on their channels the same conversation that they had. One would post it as, I'm having a debate, the other's having a conversation. Example, Tim Pool and David Pakman. Tim Pool said, a conversation with David Pakman. And David Pakman put a debate with Tim Pool. They were coming at from different perspectives, or at least relaying as different perspectives. So if even you're talking about people on that scale, where I think they were a little below 1 million on their main channels at the time, it's like, yeah, folks like that don't actually agree or are communicating on the same level of what's going on, then I think this is just, I don't know. I think these are things we should keep in context where people only have limited context. I think Sam Harris said it best, where it's like, if you come across new information that you didn't have before, it's like, it's good information. Why wouldn't one attempt to incorporate that? And I think a lot of times incentives come in the way.
Well, thanks for the feedback in the chat. Goulian, I don't know if that's how you pronounce your name there, but always nice to have some nice compliments. Yeah, I mean, people get upset, and I understand. Understandable. The whole never fun to realize that one didn't know quite as much as one thought. And sort of the deciding factor of whether one can be a philosopher is if you can live with that basically constant feeling of being a total dumbass.
You running into brick walls can sting, at least initially, and then you kind of get used to it.
It's just like, you know. So
Someone that
I'm
played
honestly just
Wall,
happy.
these things happen.
I'm happy to have the company, frankly. And then I feel like you're so close to the right perspective because ultimately, like, it's all about bridging the gap between a belief and a thought. And the best, in my view, current metaphor for that is this axiomatic decomposition, aka this mathematical thing. We think that way anyway because we have conscious precept beliefs, aka formal laws that dictate behavior.
Well, my big thing is I think and I forget who the past two gentlemen on here. I apologize, assuming gender, but the past two folks that were on before, you're kind of getting the Euclidean thing, and like that's where I started getting fascinated. I'm like, oh, this is great. I mean, they're getting into very interesting things here because at this point I realize even if I go under the assumption it's like, okay, I look at that model, I'm like, let me assume this is all correct. Even if it was all correct, you're presenting something that other folks they only have their personal experience, and if they've been looking things through a lot of like string theory and other geometric theories and everything, I'm like, yeah, this is probably also the other reason why like Dr. Eric Weinstein's geometric unity, his thing is incredibly similar to Thad's thing. The only thing that he really didn't have was that Mobius twist of the hyperbolic figure 8 knots complement and wrapping it around the Planck mass. I'm like, other than that, it looks to be a lot of the same things. But the thing is, how do you communicate that in a way? Because if folks have never seen anything like this before, how much time does it take to invest in that? Especially if you're trying to work with like like Professor Carroll's theory, where he's like, "Oh, I get time to go backwards and everything." He's like, "Differential equations are wicked hard," and I totally like that as someone from the greater Boston area, utilizing some of our local vernacular here. But what I'm saying is, how do you start to communicate it to our fellow human beings in a way that they understand? If they happen to understand things like things within ring theory or utilizing a punctured disk, or was it, I'm seeing Kolmogorov homology rings or something is a way I think a lot of this has been getting explained. I saw on the IHS the other day. Um, these are the things I think we're pretty much saying the same things. We're just saying in ways that other folks that are familiar with those things know how to go about utilizing them. Because you can say the greatest thing in the world, but if somebody has no idea what you're talking about, it's like, well, what do I do with this? So I think I'm steel womaning your proposition that math can
I
help.
haven't steel womaned it yet. You've described it semi-accurately, and for that I am largely grateful. I do not wish to go into steel manning that LARPology that would take hours to go into. Here's what I
I
think it
appreciate
is.
your specificness and seeing as it wasn't a perfect metaphor and calling me out on that. This is why I like you.
You're doing really well, like honestly. To me, it's not even anything about where someone starts. To say you're starting at a low position of achievement, as we've talked about this already, like you already need to understand things, have some degree of contemplation to be able to understand anything at all or follow in the first place. But I think you've made a lot of progress in a, I don't know, I don't want to say 3 months, but it feels like it's been at least 3 months of solid contributions that are integrating substantive understanding.
Good. It only took me like a year and a half.
That's pretty good, to be honest. Some people spend, like, I think just it comes to mind, like someone wanted to learn to lucid dream. You know what that is?
It's not like when you're kind of like dreaming while you're awake.
It's when you're dreaming, you're asleep dreaming, but you can control the dream. So the idea is that you are aware. Lucidity is that you're at least
Oh, you're
aware.
aware you're dreaming. That doesn't happen for folks on a decent regular basis.
In fact, somebody who, indeed, this was his domain of study, was obsessed. I don't want to say obsessed, but in a bad way, but passionate, right? And he never once achieved lucid dream his whole life. So yeah, I know it's like, okay, you're gonna have to now 3 months. It's starting to actually not be nothing. That is actually really fast because you're, talking about knowledge that some people may have to spend many years just focusing on a basis upon which more layers can be meaningfully put later on. But right now, this is not a substantive enough focus to actually hold anything meaningfully. I hope this latest image, speaking of things not being easy to hold, and I just realized like the gap is so huge because I think what it is I'm doing is going from 3+1D, trying to bring it down to 2D, become papyrus pilled. What do you think of my joke?
I like that. I like that. I think I get the gist. We're trying to have
And
something
so
we could legitimately put
2022,
on paper. Well,
2022, we
2022.
take the papyrus pill and we go on a mission of papyrus pilled peace. What do you think?
Well, it seems more holistic, so let's go with it.
We start calling ourselves the PPP squad because I feel like that may not land.
Just double check before you put like a hashtag out there, because I almost put like hashtag CCC for conformal cyclic cosmology with tagging Roger Penrose earlier, at least an account that seems to be Roger Penrose's account according to Google. And apparently that also happens to do something to do with a political party in like South Africa or something. So I'm glad I checked first. May have caused undue controversy. But no. It's a lot of folks. It's like people say quantum physics, this, that, or the other thing, and it's like a lot of people start getting scared. Like, oh, this is things that like all these smart people they say they don't understand and everything. And also, it's like, well, what the heck does this have to do with me? It's like I'm working hard. I'm trying to support like myself and my family and everything. It's like, how does this actually influence me? And where I would say, I'm like, we are literally at the point now where we can actually have these things influence us. Because I went back, and this is why I love like the algorithms of YouTube and stuff, because they'll show you exactly what you want to see. And it went back to the discussion where I had first come across Professor Brian Keating, the Nick Fury of the physics community, and one of the experimentalists on there, I believe, Professor Beecham. He was saying that, all right, the Large Hadron Collider, it's like we found the Higgs boson. It's like, well, technically we found everything according to the standard model. And that's a very weird feeling. It's like, where do we go from here? And if it comes to the point where we just simply needed to manipulate the things that we currently have to get things together, basically all I'm saying is when I start seeing things out of Brown University saying we're reaching high temperature superconductors by using multi-layer twisted graphene, and it creates these little like electromagnetic vortices that essentially end up creating superconductivity. I'm like, I'm seeing that. I'm seeing the advances in 3D printing. I'm just like, I'm feeling more and more we're like at the precipice of actually being able to not only explain why the different phenomena that we observe are going on, but actually implement them from an
Well, you know what
engineering
I'm going to ask you
standpoint.
now, don't you?
It,
You account for the
no,
vortices.
what's that?
I said, you know what I'm going to ask you? And then I said, can you account for the vortices?
I see. I'm going over my my assumption right now is the primary action, or it's the derivative of the primary action, or the complement, rather.
Yeah.
The resonating waveform, brah.
All I can say as a preview that the model involves slowing down infinity motion, finite motion, gradually, dimension by dimension, in a reductive sense, down from not 3+1, but 3+1 is the first factorialization, if you will, of matter.
Well, it's how you would have achieved some form of observe. Again, this
You
is
see, okay,
why
hold
words are
on,
important.
Stop for a second. Can you see why I call it the measurement limit now?
Oh, it's fascinating.
It's like, why does calculus work? Because it's papyrus pilling atoms.
I don't have the connection there. I feel something poking that's trying to connect there, and it's making my brain hurt.
Quantum foam says something being an axiom of a particular theory and something being a fact are two different things. I would completely agree with you on that. Very reasonable, and it's important to distinguish. Otherwise, the assertions that get made lead people to come to conclusions that simply were not at any point implied. That's why I spent 2+ hours grilling. It was very friendly, and it was a private comp that I didn't record, so whatever. But I talked to Thad when we first met him, and I did try to basically extract the axioms. It wasn't possible.
See, my general, if you postulate that, is I thought of a lot of it was just space, time, mass, charge, and temperature. Like if you utilize those, you can essentially derive basically all of the observables.
That's sort of a different question than what are axioms in general. But if we accept the position of the a priori reasoning style that the Euclidean axioms use, then yes, what you're saying.
Well, I mean, I thought the whole breakthrough here, at least in my opinion, was that is geometrically describable from an object that we've learned a heck of a lot about over the past 50 years. Like and that seems to be another supporting thing. And again, in my opinion, one of the greatest things that string theory has taught us is like this math actually seems to work and seems to be able to describe existence. Now, even if the string theory model in and of itself doesn't necessarily have everything to completely describe what's going on.
Don't you see that this is a string theory?
Well, that's why I say it hasn't been complete. I'm not going to say it's wrong because I sit back. I'm like, all right, the conceptualization in string theory, we're going to describe things with strings. And then even if you go down to any type of describe a manifold, it's like, well, we're assuming a fibered bundle here. Well, a fiber bundle, like, I don't know. I live in a mill city, and all I know is fiber bundle kind of sounds like a string to me. So it's and again, it's like I really would hope that internalized human or personalized human conflicts are not preventing us from
Stop right
actually
there
achieving
before you
next level.
start crying on your soapbox again. I want to give you a challenge here. Build me the triple eight, not the inverse, just the triple eight. Figure eight knot, okay? Just build me the triple eight using geometric primitives, just for fun.
Wait, what? The triple eight?
How about
You
figure
are you
eight knot?
talking about a proton?
I'm talking about the figure eight knot.
Tri- What?
Okay, you know the complement that we're always talking about?
Yes.
I'm referring to the original knot,
Right. You mean the figure eight?
non-complement. That's what I'm talking about. I'm asking you to derive that using geometric primitives.
Ooh. I know the. Actually, no, I don't.
Okay, I'll give
I
you an
know the
even easier
Wolfram.
one. Start with the U knot. Just describe me the U knot in geometric primitives. Anybody can try this. I'll even post it. Can get it to
Well,
come up
that's.
here.
See, I thought that was not. All I know is when I type the formula. What was it? It's the thing to calculate the volume of the hyperbolic figure eight knots complement. I attempted to use variables in Wolfram alpha, and I exceeded my computation time.
There's a lesson in there. I mean, there's a
Maybe I need to upgrade
there's
to
a very
pro.
salient, very deep and penetrating lesson somewhere in that anecdote.
In me exceeding my computation time, or the torus, or the circle.
We're abstracting on the ultimate abstraction rather than asking why is this abstraction so potent. I want to account not just for Euclidean axioms, but all Euclidean axioms, just the easiest ones to account for because we've been using them for so long. But even that, and the fact that we've been using them for 2,500 years, anybody actually?
Oh my God! You could make that yellow like in Sonic. It could be a Sonic ring. We'll appeal to the Sonic verse and the furry community. There we go. I
I will
apologize
leave
for my
that
preaching.
to. I will leave the color to my first. Oh, that is the UNOT. It is basically a Cheerio. Anybody want to take a crack at building that up from metaphysical primitive?
I thought that was the unknot. Oh, that's what you're saying when you mean
Maybe I
U-Not.
mispronounced it. I guess I.
Oh, no, because I got really confused. I heard
I'm gonna
U-Not.
confess something.
No,
I'm gonna
because it's
confess
the
something right
U-Not is a
now.
knot that's not knotted. Yeah. Okay.
Cut.
I just got really like my brain was like the U-Not. What haven't I heard about this? I'm like I saw like at least the first like 7 knots, and I'm like I don't remember that there. I'm like, oh my God, I've done such a terrible job using Google.
Okay. Thanks for asking the question that I probably can't answer right now. I have no friggin' clue because my 2.5-hour inquiry didn't actually allow me a complete parameterization of the axioms.
Oh,
But
so it's 2R pi.
that aside, I was hoping someone would want to take a crack at building this from metaphysical primitives because it's one of the simplest shapes to build. It's probably in topology, it is the simplest identity, I think. Want me to explain it to you? I'm not trying to make people feel bad or
Yes.
anything, but nobody's answering, so I'm assuming nobody knows what the heck I'm talking about here.
No.
And so how do we build this? I've got the U-Not displayed now. I just want to make sure that it's coming through. Okay, good. All right, so you start with a circle. Can you start with a circle? We allowing ourselves the freedom to start with circles.
Yes. Go circle.
Fuck it. Let's not even do that. Some asshole in the audience will be like, I don't want to do that. And be like, fine. How about I just start with a point and a line? And someone's gonna be like, no. And I'm like, oh, fine. I'll just start with a point. So point extended into a line, connected back to the beginning makes a. That's correct, Nunya. Good. So then we take the circle and orient it like a torus and rotate it around that fixed axis to obtain the U-Not, which is essentially a torus. There we go. Thank you for that diagram. That's helpful. Unlike Daryl's comment. Here we go. So you see how that's a series of steps, a priori, step by step, quote, axioms.
Okay, we have a circle and we orient it a different way and we get a torus. Or no, excuse me. We have it extend and then it creates a torus.
It's a series of movements, which could argue are deformations to matter. Sort of a different question because, like, what configuration is matter in when it's undeformed?
Yeah. Well, it's essentially it's if it was putty, you could essentially deform the putty into an object like that.
The putty will be predictably arranged because matter has predictable order. It's just a 3 + 1 dimensional order, so it's like tantalizingly close, but always just beyond.
Oh, we never hit that perfect platonic form.
Kind of breaking up a bit. I don't know if people are having trouble hearing memes right now, but he's sounding a little low to me. I don't want to like keep going back to the platonic forms, and frankly, I am not in favor of an emotionalist type interpretation of theology. I think that's largely counterproductive and basically what theology is for, as far as I understand it. All right, so we've got people talking about constructing donuts at home, so that's interesting. But yeah, main thing to take away from this is number of deformations relative to neutral, which is always domain specific, has an energetic cost. The universe minimizes energetic cost, but those energetic things aren't zero because there's a perpetual expansion, which eventually hits into things that are already existing, which are de facto barriers energetically that can't necessarily be surmounted. So there's de facto backing up, which isn't really backing up, it's expanding into itself. That's where the order comes in. I just, for some reason, all these words, they exist in French, they don't exist in English, so I back to wondering if I have to come up with a new term.
We achieve balance. And I love you sharing that right now, Jen, because the sheer fact, and I apologize for doxing your homeland, But being a Canadian, very often, well, national language happens to be French. So if you happen to learn it in a particular way, and now you're adding a different, maybe this is an isomorphism, because what we're doing is you're attempting to communicate the same thing, however, it's in a different form. And that's why I
Think
love
of
that
it
you were
like
touching
this.
upon language.
Isomorphism is a metaphor for what we're talking about on some level. Sorry I cut you off
Yeah.
there. I just really loved what you said because I have spent a long, long time trying to integrate these teachings, and I get in so many fights that I sometimes lose hope that anyone's actually going to realize just how much work was done in that
No,
direction.
you've averaged off so many interactions you've had, so it's like, all right, if I've had so many of these interactions, so many of them have been negative, why wouldn't I assume negativity? That's why I'm like, I see a lot of folks doing that because there is a lot of salt on the internet. Because if you're trying to plug yourself in and learn an amazing amount of stuff, it's like, all right, now you're trying to drink the ocean through a fire hose, and the ocean by nature is salty. So all I'm saying is, I see. That's why I kind of go about it in almost the opposite way. I'm like, let me assume charitability. And the crazy thing is from my experience, a lot of times I'm like, oh, I'm just going to get all these things. And I'm like, well, let me integrate the core of, well, yeah, mean words on the internet are mean words on the internet. So I kind of go about my time, don't take it personally. And if you survive the first salvo of people, because a lot of folks just like to poke and troll and have a little fun, once you realize that, it's like, I've had some very interesting conversations from people that tangentially may have wanted me not to exist. And I find that fascinating. I think that comes back to the whole coming in upon itself.
Um, I was following up until the very last bit.
The last bit wasn't properly formed. It makes sense in my head, but I need to use a lot more words, and it was getting off tangent.
Are you thinking like the serendipity associated with insight when you've integrated some sort of higher principle?
I I just think that I heard Thad once say that depending on the protons and the neutrons, like one is literally pulling itself together and the other is kind of pulling itself apart, but it's balanced out by an additional action that ends up generating its form. And I feel like, well, if those are some of the core building blocks of reality, why wouldn't we emulate doing the same thing?
Because it's redundant. It's, defeating the purpose of computers. That's why it's hilarious. It's like perception, there's this perception of a false binary, which is like caused because we don't have an understanding of consciousness, which is caused because we wanted to desubjectivize science. So I see how the intention
Can
is
I?
now hitting up against, this is where you have to, I want to say reculer, but a recurse is going to come out as recurse, but like back up into philosophy from science. That's where it's necessary because it's clearly no more insight. If there is a development, it's unclear what it means. Like take for example Hamroth. Like I know he's on the right track. That's because I'm bringing in other knowledge from a different domain, right? Like, I already know about consciousness and such.
Well, that's the thing. So much of this stuff is translatable, and probably the best example I could cite of that is the whole Wolfram Physics project. Because the thing is, even if it doesn't necessarily, at least at this point, have a fundamental theory of physics, the sheer fact that they're showing different causal relationships, especially within the greater realm of mathematics and logic, just showing those connections across all different domains, and showing in some ways like, yes, there seem to be a lot of things that seem to be consistent throughout humanity in many different forms, that in and of itself is very interesting. So, I mean, it may show up in a slightly different form. There may be some deviation depending on the levels of complexity and the other factors that are going on, but it's like, I don't know, all seems connected, bruh. This is the point
Very
where I start
close.
using. Go on. Well, this is the
Very
point where I
close
start
with the
using.
role space thing.
Well, this is why I love your little link thing that you showed me. It's like I sent you a picture. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna think this is gonna be some crazy metaphysical thing, and I just see Link in one of the dungeons where he only has limited sight. I'm like, that is such a good analogy. As a gamer, I totally respect.
Oh
We
my
are
god, I
wandering throughout the
literally
dungeon.
cannot play any games because I get motion sickness in like 3 seconds for basically anything more complicated than that. Or okay, wave race. Actually, I unironically love wave race. Okay. I just want to make that aside there. I shared something regarding a Mobius strip in the chat, which is connected to how models work, right? So back to this idea of redundancy. If nature's already doing something, we don't need to do it again. That's, I mean, the doubling down on the bias that's already there, the existential bias field or whatever. That's a current mistake that we're making. Like, I guess you could say, loosely, it's the map territory fallacy. We're saying because calculus worked, now it generalizes, but it's the opposite conclusion we ought to draw is that calculus works because it is basically reverse biasing the reality field.
Right.
It's flattening space-time. That is...
We're papyrus pilling ourselves.
Well, calculus is basically a papyrus-oriented. It's. Have you ever heard the theory that if aliens came here, or it's more of a description, if aliens came here, they would think that it was cars that ran the world?
Yeah.
So it's like specially adapted to cars. You think of, physics being adapted to calculus for the wrong reasons. That being
If you're
one
just going to do a
limitation
quick
of time.
flyby, you look down. What do you see? Oh, you see these millions of like steel vehicles putzing around, spinning out that CO2 and everything. It's like, well, they seem to run the world. Whereas you look a little closer from a different level, it's like, oh, it's the human beings. They're making these cars with these machines and they're kind of driving them around. And yeah, it depends on your observational perspective.
Minimum rendering principle.
Excuse me, level of dimensionality is probably a better way to put it.
Well, what does that mean exactly? Because we want to be careful with these extremely broad concepts, because dimensionality, other than the non-dual metaphysical primitive concepts, dimensionality is the most fundamental concept. So we don't want to throw that term around. We want to use the fact that it already has a colloquial understanding in several domains, and moreover, benefit from the fact that there are slightly different definitions in different fields, i.e. computers and math.
Okay, viewing a sphere or a sphere-like object as close as we can get to its true identity, quote unquote, on a computer screen versus holding it in your hand. I would say holding in your hand would yield higher observable dimensionality, I claim.
All right, well, I guess we can wrap it up soon. It looks like we've been going for just over 2 hours, unless anyone else wants to
Yeah,
get
I
up.
was gonna say, yeah.
It's been a
I'm
very
good.
interesting talk. I really enjoyed this one. I had pretty much no clue where it was going to go. I've had a couple combos with Easy Rider of varying degrees of success, but see, this one was by far the best. I'm really happy it happened, as well as all the contributions from the other people in the server, and looking forward to the next one. Always open to suggestions on these. Do you want to any last words, Memes? Maybe shout out to your channel, and hopefully we'll be putting some stuff on our joint channel soon.
Oh yes,
Eigenranges?
yes, the Eigenranges YouTube channel, which we're totally gonna monetize so we can upgrade Jen's potato. But yeah, no, if anyone's interested, find me on the YouTubes at The Memes of Destruction, on the Twitters at Meme Destruction, or any other sites if one searches one could find. I'm not gonna show 18 plus things here. Wait, Twitter is 18 plus, or isn't it? I don't know.
I'm not sure. I'm just going to throw your link to your channel in the chat. For anyone who's interested can sub to that. I think you're getting pretty close to 1,000 subs. It's over 850, so congratulations.
Thank you. But yeah, no, I'm good. I'll talk to you later, Jen. Thank you all for listening. Peace out, everybody.
Thanks for contributing. And yeah, thanks for everyone.